Nate Saunders and Laurence Edmondson joining you again from ESPN. And in this edition, we're going to talk about the rookies. We have 6 rookies in Formula One this year, which is a large amount of rookies. Slightly depends on whether you consider Liam Lawson a rookie, but we will get into that.
I think officially he is. I mean, I know he's had about 10 races, but he's not had a rookie season. So I think to have a rookie season, you've got to start and finish it. So, I think it's fair. I mean, it's asterisk next to it, but I do think he belongs in this list.
Well, we'll get to Lawson a little bit later on. We're going to do it alphabetically because that's maybe the fairest way to do it. And happily, that means we start with young Andrea, Kimi, Antonelli, 18 years old, going in at Mercedes as the replacement for Lewis Hamilton. I mean, the pressure doesn't get much bigger than that. Recently passed his driver's license, so he can drive now on the road as well as on a Formula One circuit. And then a quick rundown of his record. He finished 6th last year in Formula 2, perhaps not the result that people were hoping for from Kimi Antonelli in F2, but there were reasons for that. And then the year before, he was in Freca, which is essentially F4. He won that championship. He skipped F3 and went straight into F2 last year. And then prior to that, he won German F4 and Italian F4. And he has a remarkable karting record. And when he was in karting, everyone was already highlighting him as something pretty special. So would he live up to the hype? I mean, that's the question, right?
Well, it's huge hype. And I mean, just laying out that list, I can remember a few years ago when the name Kimi Antonelli started kind of circulating around the paddock, the word WONDERKID was being used. He was 15, 16. Obviously, a big thing in that was he picked Mercedes. A lot of people wondered maybe Ferrari would get him. Obviously, an Italian driver seemed like a perfect fit. I mean, in terms of living up to the hype, I feel for him already because I feel like, what is an acceptable level for Kimi Antonelli? Like you said, replacing Lewis Hamilton is just such a huge task to go into. And we got a glimpse of it maybe last year in Monza, didn't we? Which is where this photo is from here. He stepped in to replace Lewis at Monza for FP1, as a lot of young drivers do. Had a very quick start and then spun out of the parabolica and crashed out. And obviously that became the big story. And you get the feeling, don't you, that, and I mean, Toto Wolff said it. He said, I'd rather slow down a quick driver than try and make a slow driver speed up. And you get the feeling that Mercedes are just braced for a very up and down season with this guy. I think he's very, very exciting. It's a lot to ask of him early on. And I think he's actually in a really good spot for that. I think Toto Wolff's he's a pragmatic guy. He's not going to throw Kimi Antonelli under the bus if he has a few bad crashes early on, which might be different in other teams. So in terms of living up to the hype, I think it's honestly going to be difficult for him to do that. But we've seen drivers, I mean, look at Lewis's debut season. Look at how Max started in Formula One. These guys come out and just grab the initiative. And I think we're seeing more and more now that these young drivers come into Formula One very, very prepared, very, very ready. And like you said, there were reasons behind his F2 season. And I think even when you look at Colapinto, F2 doesn't seem like the best judge now of these younger guys. There's a lot of things going on there. So I'm really excited about him. And as somebody with Italian heritage, great to see an Italian back on the grid, because I love Fisichella and Trulli when they were in, but they never felt like superstars. And this guy, I mean, he seems like he could be that. And, obviously Ferrari, Italian fans always massively root for Ferrari. That's kind of the stereotype of fandom. But I think it's great for such a rich racing heritage nation to have a driver like this on the grid. So super excited. I think it's going to be a difficult year for him, to answer your question. But I think that should be allowed. He's 18. I think maybe he turns 19 quite early in the season. So there's got to be measured expectations. You know Mercedes quite well. You actually called Kimi Antonelli, I think, before anyone else I'd heard this year. So shout out to Laurence for that. What do you think about his chance this year?
Yeah, I was lucky to actually spend some time with him in Baku. Did an interview with him, and the thing that comes across, and I think will really help, especially if he has a bit of a slow start or takes him a little while to get up to speed, is that he's a really likable guy.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's immediately obvious. And actually, before I did the interview, he happened to be talking to some engineers around the table, and they were just so engaged with him because, one, I think everyone at Mercedes knows that Kimi Antonelli is important to the future of that team. They've just lost Lewis Hamilton, such a big name. And now Antonelli coming in, they want him to be something special. They all desperately want it. But there's the signs that's there. And then also, this personality that comes through. I think partly because he's Italian as well. Yeah. He has this kind of, way about him.
And do you remember how excited the Italian journalists were in Monza just to be covering him? It felt really special, actually. And I think you're right. I think he's going to be super popular. We see what happened with Colapinto and when him coming in. So I think there's a lot to that as well.
Yeah, and I think just to go back to that main thing that we talk about with Antonelli all the time is just his pace, his raw pace. And you're right, in F2, it didn't come through. I think this is going to be a theme as we go through all these rookies, like their F2 careers and why they didn't work out or did work out. But despite that, there were clear signs that this guy is exceptionally quick. And then there's all these kind of stories you hear, almost like mythology already around this guy. He's only 18 coming in.
It's like Nuvolari, isn't it? The old like there's a guy from the 30s and 40s who there's all these stories about. Like, is this true? And you don't know what's true and what's not. But with Kimi, there's loads of that already, you know.
Yeah, and so, performance in a wet test in F3 cars surrounded by other F2 drivers where he was, seconds faster and stuff like that. So, we're going to get answers to all of that very early in Formula One, and it's going to be tough. And I think he's going to have accidents. One interesting fact, of course, the last driver who came in super young in Formula One and was very quick, Max Verstappen, is one that springs to mind. If Antonelli wins one of the first 3 races, he actually takes the record for youngest driver, which would be interesting. I mean, whether he does it or not, that's a lot of extra pressure piled on. But he's 18 in August for the record.
Oh, right.
Sorry, 19
in
August.
August.
He turned 18 last August.
Which is, I mean, and yeah, I think, I love the fact Mercedes promoted him. They easily could have gone for a Carlos Sainz. They could have tried to get Fernando, or, they could have. And I think that I think a lot of these guys mark this shift, but he perfectly encapsulates this shift now that teams have. You lose a superstar driver, you immediately go to the well of, we have this young guy here. If he works out, he's the next 5, 6, 7 years of this team. Obviously, George in the other car. So really exciting times for Mercedes. And I mean, it'll be weird seeing Mercedes without Lewis, but I think it injects a bit of freshness and a bit of fun in that team. And yeah, I can't wait to see it. So yeah, and if he wins one of those first 3 races, can you imagine? I mean, that would be such a good story. We've all been focusing on Lewis. It's like, should have been focusing on the other guy.
So next up, Oliver Bearman, who in fact was Antonelli's teammate in F2 last year. Again, arguably not a true Formula One rookie because we've already seen him in a Ferrari and a Haas. He makes his full season debut in a Haas this year. What do we know about Bearman?
Well, another really likable guy. And kind of the contrast to Antonelli, signed by Ferrari quite young, moved from England over there. I spoke to him at Imola when he was doing his first couple of Haas practice sessions. And by then, of course, he'd already had that Ferrari debut. And you're right, that was absolute last minute. Carlos Sainz had appendicitis, obviously. And I remember when they said Oliver Bearman's in, you just think, are you making a debut not just at the last minute, but you're making it for Ferrari at a street circuit, one of the toughest challenges. And I think he finished down the order from where you would have expected Sainz to finish, but a really respectable performance. And he did the one thing I think that he had to do, which was clean race, kept it out of the wall, and looked quick. And afterwards, you had guys like Lewis and Charles Leclerc saying what a great job he'd done. So again, I think his F2 season was massively disrupted by Formula One. So I never thought it was a fair guy, because he obviously came in and raced for Haas as well later in the year. But yeah, he seems really, really quick. And I think that what a lot of people have said who I've spoken to about Bearman, both at Ferrari and Haas, is really impressed with the maturity on his shoulders, the way he talks to the team, the way he gives feedback, stuff like that. So we're going to be saying this a lot, but another really exciting young guy coming in. And again, I mean, those two have a good rapport, which is nice when you see two drivers who have a bit of a friendship built up. But yeah, I think both these guys are going to be around in F1 for a long time. Yeah,
so he was 12th in Formula 2 last year. Again, not the kind of
really
record
misleading,
going in.
Yeah.
But misleading because he, skipped races in Saudi, where he was on pole actually before he then got the call up to do one practice session, a qualifying session, and the race. So not an entirely fair representation of what Bearman can do. And also, we should say, Prema, the team that both Antonelli and Bearman drove for last year, struggled with new regulations in Formula 2. But I think, the other interesting thing about Bearman is that he seems super intelligent as well. I was lucky to interview him fairly soon after that Saudi race, and it was on a Zoom call. But really kind of considered in his answers. Already knows Italian pretty well from his time at Ferrari. Actually knows a little bit of Latin as well.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, which I don't think there's many F1 drivers on the grid or many people in the F1 paddock who can speak Latin, but apparently Bearman's got a little bit up his sleeve. So I think there's an awful lot to him. I guess the question is, because he is that potential Ferrari driver going forward, is what does he have to do at Haas, and how long would he be at Haas before Ferrari either call him up or they start to wonder whether he really is the future for them? Yeah,
that is a good question. I think he's going to be there for a few years, you would imagine, unless something catastrophically goes wrong with the Charles and Lewis pairing up front. But that seems to be set in stone for the next few years, doesn't it? Barring any kind of fallout between the two of them or one of them going on to another team. So I think really what he's got to do at Haas is, he's going up against Esteban Ocon, which is a pretty challenging circumstance. I think Ocon is very underrated. I mean, I know he's got that race win, but Ocon is a really big benchmark for him.
And a tough teammate in every sense. In that not only tough to beat on track, but sometimes tough to race against as well.
100%. So I think actually Ferrari will look at that, and I think that's a really great place for him to ply his trade. But he's got to kind of do what he did in Saudi in the debut, especially in his rookie season. Don't make headlines for the wrong reasons. Be quick, be impressive, and just put himself in that situation that Charles Leclerc was in a bit in 2018 with Sauber, where it's like, and it was easier for Ferrari then because they were moving on from Kimi, who kind of was clearly kind of past it by that point. But just have that situation where it's like, clearly when Ferrari have to make that call, there's no other choice but him. You know, he doesn't want to be up and down, and they're like, well, maybe maybe they're going a different direction. So I think really it's just beat Ocon if he can, maybe not this year, but maybe next year. But I can see him doing that, just given his talent. And if he does beat Ocon, you would say he definitely deserves that step up, I think.
Okay, next on our alphabetical list is Gabriel Bortoleto, who comes into Formula 1 with a remarkable record because he was Formula 3 champion in 2023 and Formula 2 champion
about F2.
in 2024. And so the only other people that have done that recently, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri, all drivers which are very established in Formula 1 now. So clearly he's got the right pedigree, the right results coming in to Formula 1. Of course, he was a McLaren junior driver, but Sauber were interested enough, and part of this whole new Sauber project that's going to turn into Audi in 2026. And they were looking at drivers to partner Hülkenberg, who they signed very early last year to drive for 2025. And they were looking for drivers to partner him, and they decided Bortoleto was their man. So again, you know, is he going to live up to the hype of going from F2 champion up? Is he going to live up to that record that has been set by Russell, Leclerc and Piastri?
Well, I'll defer the opinion to someone who knows what he's talking about, you would imagine, on the grid, which is Fernando Alonso. And in Abu Dhabi at the end of last year, he was asked about, you know, Bortoleto. Bortoleto went through Alonso's karting academy at one point.
Yeah, we should say that he is linked to
of course. So there's there was maybe a vested interest in Alonso saying this, but he said, I think he's the best rookie by far out of the guys coming through. He pointed to that record that you've pointed out to as well, and hard to argue, even though we say F2 is not the best guide, if you're winning stuff like that, you can't really downplay it. So massively impressive talent. And actually, I think these two guys have stolen a lot of the headlines for different reasons, because they've been closer to F1. But I think Bortoleto, despite winning F2, has kind of gone under the radar a little bit. So I think there's real potential there, real talent. And I'm excited for him. And actually, I think Sauber's a great place for him to be because of that Audi project you mentioned. I think Sauber in 2025, the last of their worries really is what they're doing on track, because everything that's coming in. So I think he can have, again, no driver wants to sit there and be like, I'll drive terribly all year, but I think it really takes that pressure off of him in that way. And Hülkenberg's a good measure. Hülkenberg's been really good since he came back. So I think he's another one to look out for. And if he is as good as Alonso says, what a coup for Audi to be coming into F1 with a potential superstar on their hands. So pretty exciting. And I know that Alonso often goes to the most extreme point of view either way, but I think that they're, listening to what he said, I think he was genuine about that. He was really impressed with him. And when you hear a former world champion talk about a young driver like that, it does make you sit up and take notice. So a lot of reasons to be excited about him. Yeah,
and clearly Alonso's known how good he is for a while, obviously.
Otherwise, he wouldn't have joined the academy,
So, an interesting one going up against Hülkenberg, like I say, very good. And also, my concern, to flip around kind of slightly what you just said, is that if you are at the back of the grid in a Sauber, if Sauber don't make the step forward that they really need to make this year, if they're back where they were last year, then you're always directly compared to your teammate, and it's harder to sometimes shine. Right. And even your really good results might only mean you finish 19th instead of 20th. And that can be difficult. So that would be my slight concern for him. The other thing we should mention is Brazilian back on the grid, which I think is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Like what we were saying with Antonelli. I mean, I think Brazil is one of those nations that it's strange when there's not a Brazilian driver on the grid, just because, if you've grown up watching it over the last few decades, it always felt like there's been someone there, and they're such a passionate nation. So, and we know a couple of Brazilian journalists who are super excited. I mean, it's basically given them a new lease of life covering Formula One. So that's great. Really, really good. I mean, Interlagos will be great fun with him there.
Yeah, and wears a helmet very similar to Ayrton Senna. I don't know if he'll keep that into next year, but he had done previously. Also interesting that Antonelli is also a huge fan of Senna, and the reason he chose his number 12 race number is because it's one that Senna used earlier in his career as well.
There you go.
There you go. Learning new things here.
New things every day. It's great.
So Jack Doohan up next, and this is a tricky one because he's going in at Alpine, to partner Pierre Gasly, of course, replacing Esteban Ocon, who's going to Haas. But he spent a season on the sideline last year as an Alpine reserve driver. Prior to that, in 2023, came third in Formula 2. Season before that was in Formula 2 and was sixth. And then prior to that, he was second in Formula 3. So it's a good record, but it's not an exceptional record. And it kind of felt that Alpine, they knew quite early on that Ocon was going, and they were looking around and they thought, right, no, we should promote from our own junior program. Since then, the management has kind of, certainly focused their ideas. It has changed slightly, but, it has focused their ideas on what they should be doing. And they've also signed a number of other young drivers to keep Doohan on his toes. And I think the most worrying one from a Doohan point of view is that Franco Colapinto has been signed on a multi-year contract to Alpine. So what kind of pressure does that put on Doohan going into his first full season in F1? Of course, he had that one race in Abu Dhabi last year.
Yeah, well, massive. And you use the word full season there. I think a lot of people would bet against him having a full season with Colapinto there. Unless, of course, he comes out and does something pretty remarkable. But the rumours are, and again, it's been hard to stand this up, but it doesn't seem like if Colapinto is coming into the team, it doesn't seem like Doohan's going to have that much time to prove himself. And there's two ways of looking at that. I mean, one of the reasons that I believe Alpine, that I understand that Alpine gave him that run last year was they realised he's tested a lot for Alpine. He did side-to-side tests with Mick Schumacher, which is one of the things that kind of gave him that race seat. He's tested in private, a bit like we've seen with Lewis doing with Charles, at the start of this season under the regulations. So they felt he's prepared enough that he should be able to come in and adapt quickly. And I think that sometimes in Formula One is a sink or swim business, and Abu Dhabi did feel a little bit like that. It almost kind of coloured their decision. I think they still would have got Colapinto anyway. But out of all of these rookies, he's the one you worry for a little bit, because I don't think anyone at Alpine has ever truly looked at Doohan in the same way they were looking at Piastri a few years ago. And I don't know about you, but promoting him, it did seem like they were like, right, we lost Piastri a few years ago. We bungled that. It was a massive PR disaster for the team. Let's make sure we don't do that again. I don't know if that's being cynical, but I just don't get the feeling that they've ever been truly bought on Doohan, and signing Colapinto kind of summed that up. So I feel for him, because he's a nice guy, Jack, as well. He's a really personable person. But I'm not sure he's going to get the time to prove what he can do.
Yeah, that's my concern as well. I mean, I think the important thing that we should hold on to with Doohan going into the season is that, like you said, he did impress when he's done behind the scenes testing at Alpine. At least that's what we've been told and what the team was thinking. But yeah, that was almost before the Colapinto
mania.
Mania took off. And I mean, Colapinto at stages last year did look very good. But I think Doohan has to just go into the opening race, which is his home race, and just absolutely lay everything on line and try and prove everyone wrong. Really hard position to be in, but he has to do that. But against Gasly, it's going to be tough.
But that's the other part of it. I think he's in there's a lot of things it seems like stacked against him. But like you say, if he comes out of that well, then Alpine have put themselves in a good position ultimately, because if Doohan excels in this situation, it's like, great, we've got a great lineup, and we've got Colapinto in case Gasly goes on for 26. So you can see why Alpine did that, and it's just up to Doohan to impress now.
At the end of last year, I remind everyone that Nate Saunders was all over the Red Bull driver market craziness, really, of Sergio Perez basically getting booted out at the end of the year. And one of the big consequences of that decision by Red Bull, of course, was promoting Liam Lawson, which created a position at Racing Bulls. And Isack Hadjar is filling it. He's a Red Bull junior driver. He finished second in Formula 2 last year, but had 4 wins last year in Formula 2 compared to Bortoleto's 2. So, there was this sense actually at times that had Hadjar not gone a few races without scoring points, he had the performance absolutely to be the F2 champion. So he's a hard one to pin down. And like I said, he's kind of come into F1 in a slightly weird way of, had Perez performed at the level that everyone expected Perez to perform at, then he probably wouldn't be in Formula One this year. So what can we expect from Hadjar? Is there less pressure because of that, or is it just that Red Bull thing where there's always pressure?
Yeah, I mean, Red Bull is such a hard situation to work out generally. I think one thing that's going for Hadjar is, where else do Red Bull go if he flames out this year? The obvious thing for Perez was, and for Ricciardo last year, was Lawson was always there in the background. And then Perez going, Lawson's moved up, Hadjar's gone in. There's not an obvious candidate now to replace either of these two guys, Tsunoda or Hadjar, next season. Obviously, I imagine Red Bull will be going after young drivers. I think that takes some of the pressure off. But if you'd wound the clock back 12 months and you'd said to Red Bull, okay, you're going to put Hadjar in the car in 25, I don't think they would have said, honestly, they would have felt that was the trajectory he was on at that point. You're right, he did impress in F2. In the finale, he stalled on the grid, didn't he? And that really hurt. I mean, it basically not handed the championship to Bortoleto, because Bortoleto drove a great series of races there, but it was just maybe a sign that under pressure, you do something like that, and the last person you want to think that you can't perform under pressure is Helmut Marko. So I think while the pressure is off in terms of there's no one there behind him, that Red Bull environment is just it's savage for young drivers. So and again and also let's give Yuki some props as well. He's been fantastic for 2 years. I think arguably his form is what led to it sped up Ricciardo's demise in a really quick way because he was so good. And yeah, that's going to be a really tough thing for Hadjar to go into. So maybe not under the pressure Doohan's going into, but I think that he's another one you look at and you do wonder, especially given Red Bull, it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't see out the season, just purely because that's how Red Bull's always operated. It's been very cutthroat. The one thing going for him in that sense is if he doesn't last the season, who's going in there? There's no obvious Red Bull Junior now. So I don't know, but I'm excited to see him. I don't know much about him, honestly. So a lot of the F2 drivers fly under the radar, and from what I've heard, very mixed opinions of him. I mean, what do you think? What are you expecting?
Well, I mean, I try to watch as many F2 races as I can, and one thing that always came across when Hadjar was on track is his radio messages.
Yes. These two together will be great. If
exactly.
So
yeah, something that Yuki has been criticised of over the years, but something which I think Yuki's actually really worked on. I think it's now an unfair criticism, but I think it does go to show. Which, I mean, all drivers are different, so you can't expect them to all fit a mould. But when, clearly tensions are boiling over a little bit in the cockpit, that has to take something away from all the other important procedures that you need to do in a Formula One car, including driving it fast. So that would be a slight concern. But who knows? When drivers get to F1, it'll be a brand new engineer. It'll be a completely different engineering structure. All those, more people working around you, and also, Red Bull, I think, will set out expectations on performance, but probably on his conduct in and around the car as well. And so we can see whether that remains a trait of his or whether it's something he can get under control. Or arguably one of the reasons he's so quick is because the emotions are fired up and and it does make a difference. Like I said, all drivers are different, but that would be one thing which I think we kind of know about Hadjar going in there, is that at times he can be quite shouty on the radio, express his opinions and kind of lose his cool a little bit.
Which I love. I think it adds to the enjoyment of races when there's a bit of colour going on, but also it just gives these guys a bit of an edge. Sometimes you see drivers come through and they're very media trained, don't really show much. I like it when there's a bit of fight. And to your point about Yuki, he's been making sure he doesn't push the radio. He's just been swearing into his helmet and not broadcasting it. I wonder if Hadjar eventually will follow that example, because it's something clearly. I think it's one of the reasons that Christian Horner doesn't think Yuki can make that step up. So to that point that you were making, maybe it's something Hadjar will have to rein in if he does want to progress beyond RB in the system, because we've seen Yuki get stuck there for a few years now.
Okay, and the other side of the Red Bull Racing Bulls driver equation, of course, is Liam Lawson getting the promotion to Red Bull Racing after just 11 starts in Formula One,
but across 2 seasons, which is why he's in our rookies video, which I think is fair. I think the official term of a rookie is your rookie season.
Well, he's never started a season at a team. He's always come in midway through as either a super sub or a replacement, and obviously impressed. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I think anyone who's watched Liam Lawson on track has been impressed by it. Slight problem is that he's got to go off against that guy, Max Verstappen. I mean, a normal situation, you're going into Formula One and you've impressed already and you've got some races under your belt, perfect to go into your rookie season. But what about when you're in a Red Bull against Max Verstappen?
I mean, Max is just a teammate killer, isn't he? I think, we talk about, I think Fernando's very difficult to go against. Lewis has been difficult to go against, but Max is another step. I mean, you're talking about the hardest seat, probably in Formula One in recent history. You just look at the way other drivers, he's had young drivers, he's had Perez, who I know Perez's reputation by the end was kind of in tatters, but Perez was a very, very good driver. So that's going to be tough, but I actually think that there's less pressure on Lawson to go and beat Max. I don't think anyone at Red Bull is expecting that, other than Liam Lawson. When I spoke to him in December, you always hear drivers say it. They always think they're the best driver in the world. That's how they kind of get to this level. I think what he needs to do is just do what Perez couldn't do, and that's just keep his head above water, be consistent in the car. if Red Bull doesn't have the strongest car, which, based on the end of last year, maybe might be the case, be in a situation where he's picking up points, keeping them competitive in the constructors' fight, and crucially, I think giving Max a bit of support. So often last year, Max just didn't have a driver that Red Bull could say, right, we're going to try and put McLaren into the undercut by using Perez, who's in third or whatever. He was always way down the order, and that really gets overlooked. But in terms of race strategy, that's really important. And the thing that Christian Horner said really impressed them about Lawson is the aggressive way he's raced. I mean, he annoyed Fernando Alonso in his first race back, and he obviously he seemed that him and Perez seemed like magnetically attracted to each other on track, didn't they? Their cars, but he's clearly someone who doesn't mind getting his elbows out and racing, and I think that really endeared himself to Christian Horner, and to Helmut Marko as well. So that'll be interesting. And now that he's got a quick car to do that, I think that'll be a really fun driver to watch actually this year, because I think he's a bit like Max in the kind of take no prisoners, make no excuses kind of start of racing. Could be a horribly kind of explosive situation, but I'm excited about it. And again, to paint him differently to these other rookies, he does have the benefit of having 2 half seasons under his belt as well. So you would expect him to hit the ground running a lot quicker than those other guys straight off the gate.
Yeah, I think a key for him as well is going to be qualifying, because if you look at his qualifying record against Yuki last year, okay, he came in midway through the season, very tough situation. We actually know Yuki is a very quick driver, but it was 6-0 in Yuki's favour.
I didn't know that.
I mean, he got a couple of sprint race qualifyings ahead of Yuki, but that seems significant, and not just because he's going up against Max Verstappen, but if we assume that the top 4 are going to be as competitive at the start of this season as they were at the end of last season, all of a sudden, if you're just a couple of tenths off, or even just a tenth off in qualifying, you're not quite maximising the potential of your car. Your teammate can be first or second, and you can be 8th. And obviously Perez had that to an even more extreme example because he was sometimes half a second off Max. I don't think that will be the case with Liam, and I also think him coming into that team now, without all the baggage that Perez had been slowly building up over time, means that I think actually he's going to have a better run at getting the performance out of that car this year than Perez ever would have.
I think so.
That's my hope, at least. And also, I think the other thing about young drivers coming in is that they do tend to be a bit more adaptable. A lot of, I'm going to drive the car in this way because, that's the way I've always done it, or, struggling to get around, a new basically way of having to drive a car to extract performance from it. I don't think that's an issue Liam's going to have because he's still fresh to F1. So I think that's going to be in his favour. But yeah, that qualifying, I'm sure if you went into the details and asked Liam about all 6 of those qualifying sessions, it'd have reasons.
Yeah.
But the result, is still there. And I think that's maybe a concern.
I think he'll win a race this year.
Really? It's a big shout.
I do. I think, I don't think it'll come early, but I think we've seen with Red Bull, a lot obviously depends on what we see in preseason testing. So if Red Bull come out and they're 5th in the order, then scrap this prediction. But I think he's a good enough racer that I think there'll be opportunities there for him. And I don't think he'll beat Max over the course of the season, but a bit like, we sometimes saw with guys like Ricciardo or, some of these other guys that can kind of snatch a kind of an opportunity to win. I think Lawson's got that trait in him as well. So that would be my kind of one of my bolder predictions this year.
Yeah, that is. And I want to just kind of pick on that a little bit.
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
Is that in a race that Max Verstappen fails to finish because of a mechanical issue, gets taken out, or does Liam actually beat him in a race straight up?
I think I can't see him beating Max legitimately on track unless Max hits some issues. So I think I'm assuming that there's a crazy race, but I think Liam's one of those drivers that in those situations, his debut was in Zandvoort in the rain, really impressed Red Bull, and he just put himself in a really good position and actually went, there was a point when he went wheel to wheel with Max. And Horner said he was sat on the pit wall, was like, just please don't put your car into him. And they're really impressed. They said that they see a rise in his performances when there's a bit of chaos around, in the races. So, yeah, if he beat Max on track, what a statement that would be. But I'm more imagining a crazy wet race or a crazy race where a lot of drivers go out. But to win a race is a tough thing to do. So
yeah, good shout.
Yeah,
I like it.
I'm going to put it here. So that clip will either age like milk or it will be the greatest thing anyone's ever predicted.
If it ages like milk, we'll never say it again.
Yeah, we'll just delete it. It's fine.
Okay, well, one last question on these rookies. Who do you think is going to emerge as the rookie of the season at the end of the year? Obviously, all different levels of car, so we can't just compare where they are in the championship. But who do you think is going to be the most impressive over the 24 races?
I think because of the car he's got, and just because he'll be at the front end, I think it'll be Antonelli. Just because there'll be more headlines written about him. I think it'll be more up and down, but I can really see him finding a groove quite early on. There might be some early drama, but I can see it being him. And yeah, there's just something about him, isn't there, that is just quite exciting. So I would say him, but this is what's so good about Formula One right now. All of these guys, I mean, maybe it's harder to say with Doohan, but there's a bunch of names here that it could be anything. If Bortoleto had a better car, I'd maybe put him up there, but I think you are spot on about it's harder being at that end of the grid. So in terms of the kind of the big shiny new rookie that everyone's going to be excited about, I think Antonelli, but it could be a few of them. What do you think?
No, I agree. I do think he's the pick of the crop, and it's one of those things where you get this situation in F1, and we've had it a number of times. So we had it with Max Verstappen as well, and various drivers coming through. Same with Lewis Hamilton. You hear their name from a very early age, and it's clear they're special, and everyone you talk to says how special they are. So, yeah, I'm going with Antonelli as well.
Nice. Well, another one that might age like milk. We'll see.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.